So what's America's goal in the Middle East? Well, America's doing exactly what it's been doing since the Cold War with the Soviet Union. What it's doing is bringing countries and their governments under its sphere of influence. Once the Soviet Union collapsed, the US had no serious geopolitical rivals, and at the time it was easy for the US to pursue its goal of global hegemony through regime change. So the war in Iraq that brought about the toppling of Saddam Hussein was the US's attempt to put in a US-friendly regime and bring Iraq into the US fold, just like how Saudi Arabia is today and other Gulf countries like United Arab Emirates are. But the US didn't realize that after they toppled Saddam Hussein, which was a Sunni leader belonging to a minority group, and put in a Shiite government, that didn't necessarily mean that the Iraqi government and its people are going to like the US, as the Shiites are a majority in Iraq. That brought about disunity and turmoil in Iraq. And this is exactly what the US wants to do in Syria. Again, Bashar Al Assad is a minority leader and he belongs to the Alawite sect. Once the US topples him, what would undoubtedly happen is the same thing that happened in Iraq. Terrorism, disunity, and Syria would become unstable just like how Iraq is today. But the US doesn't mind that. This is because a failed state can't fight for national interests. For example, Saddam Hussein was helping the Palestinians in liberating Palestine, and he was in danger in Israel, and of course the US was basically controlled by pro-Israel lobbies, and therefore it was bound to happen that the US would invade Iraq. Well, again, just like Saddam Hussein, Bashar al-Assad is a supporter of the Palestinian cause and is anti-American, anti-Israel, and the US, in its pursuit of a uni-polar world, has to topple President Assad. And they're doing this by funding the rebels, giving them weapons to fight against the government. And you'd be a fool to think that the US doesn't know that these weapons are going to end up in ISIS' hands. The reason for this is rebels in the rebel groups that are so-called moderate actually end up trading with ISIS. Weapons, there's a very big market in Syria for weaponry. And of course, many of these rebels actually end up joining ISIS. So what happens is US weapons and ammunition end up in the hands of ISIS. And the US knows this. But the US wants to topple Assad and it'll do it at any means. After all, ISIS will do nothing but destabilize Syria more, which is all the US can really ask for. But now it's been foiled. The Syrian army, with the help of Russian airstrikes thanks to Vladimir Putin, are now making advances against the rebels. And unless the US does something to help the rebels, it looks like they're eventually going to lose. And of course now Iraq is turning towards Russia. They'll likely be asking for airstrikes, and this would mean a very big geopolitical defeat for the US, as Iraq would also fall into the sphere of influence of Russia. This is very dangerous for the US, and it won't allow it to happen. So what it looks like now is the US is actually going to take its war on ISIS serious. They're now actually even considering doing ground ops against ISIS, and they even tried to show a night operation in which they rescued hostages inside an ISIS prison cell. And the reason for this is the US needs to gain back credibility and that it's actually trying to help the Iraqi state. But of course, it's just because the US wants to keep Russia away from the region, and it wants to maintain its dominance on the region. And as it seems, the US is not going to be keeping its sphere of influence over the region for very long.